My name is Marilyn, I'm 28 years old, and yesterday I became a millionaire. But before you think that's the start of a fairy tale, let me tell you the part that feels more like a nightmare. My rich Aunt Vivian, the woman who took me in when my parents abandoned me 15 years ago, passed away 2 months ago. She left me everything. Her $2 million mansion, her company shares, and her entire fortune. I was still deep in grief when I saw them. My parents. The same people who walked out one October morning when I was only 13, leaving nothing but a scribbled note on the counter. They stood there in my lawyer's office like ghosts from another life, smiling as if no time had passed. "We are your guardians," my mother said sweetly, her voice dripping with false familiarity. Guardians. The word stung. I wanted to laugh in her face, but my chest tightened instead. It was my lawyer who cut the silence like a knife, walking into the room with the weight of every legal document my aunt had carefully prepared. My parents' smiles froze when they saw him. That was the moment I realized they hadn't come for me. They'd come for the money. But to explain how we got to that moment, I need to go back. Back to the days when I still believed my parents loved me, before everything shattered. I grew up in a modest 2-bedroom apartment. My father was a sales manager at a car dealership, and my mother was an elementary school teacher. We weren't rich, but we had enough. We had Friday movie nights with microwave popcorn, summer camping trips with our secondhand tent, and Christmas mornings filled with hot chocolate and cinnamon rolls. For a long time I thought we were happy. Then the cracks began to show. I'd hear hushed arguments at night, my father's overtime shifts, that left him reeking of cigarettes and cheap liquor, and my mother crying quietly behind the bathroom door. I was too young to understand the signs of addiction and depression. My father's poker nights turned into weekends at Atlantic City. My mother stopped going to work, often hiding in bed with the curtains drawn. The fridge grew emptier each week. I tried to hold everything together, keeping my grades up, cleaning the apartment, never asking for much. I thought if I was good enough, maybe they'd smile again, maybe things would go back to the way they were. But then came the Tuesday morning that shattered my childhood forever. I woke up to silence. Their bedroom was empty, the closet half cleared. On the kitchen counter was a note in my mother's handwriting. "Marilyn, we cannot do this anymore. Your Aunt Vivian will take care of you. We are sorry." 16 words to erase 13 years of my life. I spent that first night alone, eating cereal and crying myself to sleep on the couch, waiting for a phone call that never came. By the third day, child services got involved. That was when Aunt Vivian appeared. A stern, silver-haired businesswoman I had only met twice before. She arrived in a sleek black car, told me to pack what I could, and whisked me into a new life that felt foreign and suffocating at first. She wasn't warm, but she was steady. She never left, never broke a promise, never failed to show up. Over time, I realized that was more valuable than the kind of love my parents had given, the kind that could vanish overnight. I would come to learn that consistency, not words, defined real family. And now, 15 years later, the very people who abandoned me walked back into my life, smiling like they still had a right to call themselves my parents. But as I looked at them that day, I felt something stronger than grief, stronger even than anger. I felt resolve. Because what they didn't know was that Aunt Vivian had prepared me for this very moment. The first days with Aunt Vivian felt like stepping into a completely different universe. Her Victorian mansion was enormous. 2 acres of land, tall iron gates, polished hardwood floors, velvet curtains, and chandeliers that sparkled like constellations above my head. My bedroom alone was bigger than our old apartment, complete with a 4-poster bed and antique furniture I was terrified of breaking. But none of it felt like home at first. Vivian's rules were strict. Breakfast at 7 sharp, no shoes on the hardwood, piano practice for an hour every day whether I liked it or not. Homework was to be done at the desk, not sprawled out on the couch. Dinner conversation had to include at least one current event and one personal achievement. No television on weekdays. I broke every single rule in that first month, half out of rebellion, half out of fear. Maybe I thought if I pushed her hard enough she'd give up on me too. But she didn't. She never threatened to send me away. Never hinted that I was a burden. Every mistake had consequences, but they were logical, not cruel. If I missed breakfast, I simply went hungry until lunch. If my homework wasn't complete, my weekend plans disappeared. First it felt cold. But slowly, I began to see the difference between her firmness and my parents' neglect. Vivian wasn't punishing me. She was teaching me discipline, structure, and responsibility, things my parents had let slip through their fingers. Still, I cried often in those early months. Once, when I was caught staring at my parents' wedding photo, I expected her to scold me for dwelling on the past. Instead, she silently handed me a handkerchief and sat beside me until the tears stopped. No words, no pity. Just presence. That was her way. And though she never once told me she loved me, she showed it in every action that mattered. She built her wealth from the ground up. What started as a small homeware shop grew into 30 upscale boutiques across 3 states. On weekends, she took me with her to meetings not because she needed me there, but because she believed I should learn. Business, she told me, is human psychology applied to commerce. Watch who concedes points, who maintains eye contact, who speaks first. It's never just about money. It's about people. At 13, I didn't fully grasp her lessons, but I absorbed them like air. And when she decided the local public school wasn't good enough, she enrolled me in Westfield Academy, a prestigious private school where the students wore blazers and carried themselves like young executives. I felt like an imposter. My classmates had yachts and ski vacations, while I had a broken family and thrift store shoes. The work was harder too. I nearly failed geometry my first semester. That was when Vivian gave me the harshest truth I'd ever heard. Your circumstances change through no action of your own, she said as I cried over my failed exam. But your response to those circumstances is entirely your choice. I don't invest in lost causes. Her words stung, but they lit something inside me. I refused to be a lost cause. I hired a peer tutor, joined study groups, and worked harder than I ever had in my life. By junior year, I was on the honor roll. I began to see glimpses of pride in Vivian's eyes, even if all she ever gave me was a firm handshake when I achieved something. But there were moments when her armor cracked. One night after a particularly heated argument about my future, me wanting a normal college, her insisting on prestigious ones, she told me something she had never shared before. My father, her brother, had been brilliant but denied opportunities because their parents couldn't afford college. He turned to gambling instead, trying to win the fortune he believed was stolen from him. I'm trying to break that cycle for you, she said quietly. For the first time, I saw not just her strictness, but her grief for a brother who had thrown away his potential. When I finally graduated high school and was accepted into Northwestern, she paid the tuition without hesitation. Education is an investment, she said. And though she never said the words, I knew what she meant. She was investing in me. College was the first time I began to see myself as more than the girl who'd been abandoned. I discovered I had a talent for design and marketing. Summers were spent interning at Vivian's company, learning the nuts and bolts of inventory management, supply chains, and vendor negotiations. Our Sunday phone calls softened into something closer to affection, sometimes even laughter. We were no longer just guardian and ward, we were partners, a strange little family forged from necessity and survival. But nothing lasts forever. 2 years ago, the ground shifted again. Vivian was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. The prognosis was grim. She faced it with the same discipline she had applied to everything in life, saying simply, "We all die. The only question is when and what we do with the time before." For the first time in my life, I became the caretaker. I managed her medications, her doctor's appointments, her meals. And in those last months, she softened more than I ever imagined she could. One evening, she held my hand and whispered, "You were the daughter I never allowed myself to have. Taking you in was the best decision of my life." She died 8 months later. I thought losing my parents had broken me, but losing Vivian shattered me completely. She hadn't just saved me, she had shaped me. At her funeral, as I stood by her grave, I realized she had become my real mother, the only one who had ever truly stayed. So when the will was read weeks later, and I learned she had left me everything, I felt 2 emotions at once, devastation and pride. But that was when they walked in. My parents. 15 years gone and suddenly here again. Their hair grayer, their bodies heavier, their smiles strangely hollow. "We are your guardians," my mother said, as if the last decade and a half had never happened. And in that instant, my grief turned to fire. Because if Vivian had taught me anything, it was that actions, not words, define love. and I was about to remind them of exactly what their actions had meant. Thompson's conference room smelled like leather and old paper, the kind of scent that clings to places where life-changing signatures have been scratched into permanence. I sat in the same chair I'd used for the probate paperwork 2 weeks earlier, palms pressed flat against the table to keep them from shaking. My parents took seats opposite me, arranged themselves as if they knew the choreography. My mother angled her body toward mine for closeness. My father claimed more space than he needed, elbows wide, a little performance of confidence. Thompson entered with a thin stack of documents that looked deceptively harmless. He greeted me first, as always, with a nod that conveyed respect rather than pity. To my parents he offered courtesy without warmth. "Thank you for coming. We'll begin." He read the will plainly without drama. The house and the land, the company shares, the accounts, the artwork, everything to me. He included, as Aunt Vivian had insisted, small bequests to longtime employees, and a portion of future profits earmarked for charities that supported abandoned and at-risk youth. It was when he paused to let the words settle that I heard the smallest sound, a breath from my mother like a prayer or maybe a curse. My father cleared his throat. "Mr. Thompson," he said, "we appreciate that our daughter has been given such a responsibility. Given her youth and lack of life experience, we feel it would be best for the family if we, as her legal guardians, assist with the management of these assets." The word guardians rang in the air like a cracked bell. Thompson didn't look at me. He looked at them over the rim of his glasses, a man accustomed to difficult rooms. "I believe there is some confusion," he said evenly, "and I intend to clear it up. However, I prefer to do so with the complete file in front of us. If you will both return tomorrow at 2, we'll review the documentation." "Of course," my mother said quickly, eager. "We're staying nearby. We can make ourselves available." She pulled a pen from her purse and scribbled their hotel on a card before sliding it toward me as if we were exchanging recipes. My father added, "Perhaps lunch beforehand, Marilyn? It's been a long time." He stuck the landing on my name like a salesman trying a first name close. I could have said no. I should have said no. But I wanted answers to questions that had lived in my ribs since I was 13, knocking whenever the world got quiet. "Fine," I said, the word small and hard as a pebble in my mouth. "Early dinner. Public place." On their way out, they brushed past Mrs. Bentley, who had slipped in quietly and taken a chair by the window. She gave me the smallest smile, the kind that says "I see you, child," without making a scene. When the door shut behind my parents, the room seemed larger. Thompson waited a beat, then set a different folder on the table. "You'll want to rest tonight," he said gently. "But if you cannot, you may find this comforting." He nudged the folder across to me. Vivian anticipated complications. Complications. The tidy word for the storm I'd felt brewing since the obituary ran. "What aren't you telling me?" I asked. "That nothing here will be decided by bluster," he said, "and that your aunt planned for outcomes most people barely imagine." He tapped the folder once with his finger. "Get some air, Marilyn. Then read." The Italian restaurant I chose had white tablecloths and a brass espresso machine that hissed like a benign dragon. Early dinner meant the room was half empty. I'd asked for a booth with a clear view of the door. I arrived 2 minutes late and still found them there with a half-poured bottle of Pinot Noir. My father's idea of sophistication, breathing on the table. He stood to pull out my chair, an old reflex that looked good but felt hollow. "We ordered your favorite," my mother said brightly, as if favorites weren't the sort of thing parents learn by showing up to 1,000 ordinary dinners. "Pasta puttanesca." "I don't eat anchovies," I said. "Water's fine." I watched the hurt flash across her face, watched my father smooth it over with a controlled smile. "You look well," he said. "Successful. Vivian must have been proud." "She was," I said. I let the silence sit. He filled it like air. He talked about their move to Arizona, better for the arthritis, about his work, managing a convenience store, solid hours, about her. On the right medication now, thank God. They asked about Northwestern, about the business, about how I decorated the house. It was the kind of conversation people have when they're auditioning for the part of We Belong Here. My mother reached across the table, fingers grazing the rim of my glass. "We owe you an explanation," she began. "What we did leaving you was wrong." We were drowning, Marilyn. Your father's debts were. Her voice trailed off. My father stepped in, neat as a handoff. I was sick, he said. Gambling isn't a hobby for some people. It's a set of handcuffs. Men were coming to the door. Real men, not the kind who send polite letters. We thought Vivian could give you what we couldn't. You had yourselves, I said, the words steady from years of rehearsal. That would have been enough. He looked down at his plate. We checked on you, he said, as if that might knock rust off the hinges. Social services told us you were with Vivian. We didn't want to make things worse. Worse than vanishing? I asked. My voice didn't rise, and that surprised me. It would have years ago. But rage is expensive fuel. I'd learned to conserve. Worse than leaving a 13-year-old a note and a rent bill? The waiter delivered our entrees, bright plates that glowed under the warm lights. My mother dabbed her eyes. We thought about reaching out so many times, she whispered. But shame is a heavy coat. And money is a light one, I said. Funny when coats get swapped. I thought it quietly but must have worn it on my face because she flinched. My father tried a different angle. We can help, he said. You're young. Even smart people get taken. Taxes alone, estate planning, it's a lot. It would be wise to let family advise you. Family. I repeated, tasting the salt of that word. What would that advice cost? He didn't miss a beat. We're not looking for handouts, he said, which is what people say before they itemize. But it's true, we have obligations. A second mortgage. Medical bills. 70 for the mortgage, 30 for the bills. 100 would give us a clean slate. $100,000. The audacity almost made me laugh. Almost. And my slate? I asked. 15 years of therapy? The birthdays you skipped? The way my name sounded when the phone never rang. Do you want to take a number for that, or will you pay cash? My mother cried for real then. Makeup bleeding into a face I remembered and didn't. We can start over, she pleaded. Let us earn it. My father lifted his glass, took a thoughtful sip, and aimed for Noble. Your aunt's fortune came from our parents' seed money, he said softly, as if the quiet might hide the greed. It's all the same family tree. Roots aren't receipts, I said. And Vivian watered that tree with her own life. By dessert, we toured their troubles twice. The debts, the condo, the dreams of being on my team, at the company in advisory roles. We stepped into the soft evening like actors blinking at the end of rehearsal. My mother hugged me at the curb, breath sweet with wine. Think about what family really means, she whispered. We all make mistakes. I drove home in the kind of silence that sounds like a crowd, the crowd of every version of me that ever waited by a window. The house held its breath when I opened the door. In the study, the folder Thompson had given me sat on the desk like a sealed fortune. I told myself I would shower first or make tea or do anything to delay that first page. I lasted 12 minutes. Inside were photocopies with raised seals, the bureaucratic fingerprints of the last 15 years. Temporary guardianship shifting to something permanent, court dates I never knew, notices sent and returned, affidavits recorded. There were reports. A private investigator's tidy prose following my father across state lines to casinos with names that sound like promises and feel like mistakes, snapshots of my mother in a uniform that looked borrowed from someone else's life. There were notes in Vivian's unmistakable hand, observations as concise as her wardrobe. Met with school. Marilyn thriving. Maintain routine. Keep doors locked when traveling. Then, nestled in a pocket with a yellow tab that read for Marilyn, a letter on heavy cream paper. My name in blue-black ink written with a pen that had made so many other signatures binding. I ran my thumb along the edge of the envelope before I opened it, as if I could store a few more seconds of not knowing. My dearest Marilyn, it began. If this finds you, it means I am where all honest ledgers end, closed and balanced, I hope, in more than one way. By now you will have seen that your parents are predictably unpredictable. You deserve to know this. When you were 16, I asked a judge to formalize what was already true. You were my daughter. I did not tell you because titles can bruise a healing limb. You owed me nothing, but I owed you everything I could arrange. The words blurred, cleared. I read the paragraph again and again, as if repetition might turn ink into air and let me breathe it. Protect your future. Never mistake guilt for guidance. Love is work performed steadily over time. All else is spectacle. She'd underlined steadily. I traced the line with my finger like a road. The phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. Arizona area code. I let it go to voicemail, then replayed it in the hush. Miss King. The old name felt like a coat someone else had worn. This is Sandra Kelly. I used to work at First National Bank where your parents did their business a long time ago. I saw their names connected with Ms. Hughes's obituary. Please call me before you make any agreements with them. There are things you should know. Things I should know. There were always more things. I thought of the 100,000 they'd named like it was a line item on a grocery list. I thought of the way my father had handled his glass, how his fingers tightened around the stem when I mentioned therapy, how quickly he'd reached for the phrase clean slate. There are only so many ways to say we want the money without moving your lips. Sleep came in fragments that night, the kind we agree to only because our bodies insist. Each time I woke, the house sounded more like itself. Vivian's clock in the hall sighed once at each quarter hour. The old radiators clicked. The garden's security light flared and dimmed with the movement of nothing at all. At 3:15, I went downstairs and opened a drawer in the desk I had never found unlocked before. It slid easily, as if it had always been waiting for my hand. A slim file, labeled Winters in Vivian's tidy script, lay inside. Different from Thompson's, more personal, less curated. Receipts, handwritten notes from phone calls, an index card with 3 bullet points, the middle one underlined twice. Never let them back in without a contract that protects Marilyn. Tucked behind it, a smaller envelope. Open only if they claim guardianship. I didn't open it. Not yet. There's a particular dignity in waiting until the curtain rises to deliver the line you know will end the scene. I turned off the desk lamp and let the dark return to its corners. I thought of Mrs. Bentley's small smile, of Thompson's steady voice, of Vivian's last underlined word. Steadily. The trick wasn't to rush the ending. It was to hold the center until gravity did the rest. Morning felt like a new country with the same weather. I ate toast standing up at the kitchen island, a habit Vivian would have frowned upon. I laughed out loud at the thought and then swallowed the laugh because it hurt. I called Sandra Kelly. She answered on the second ring with the briskness of someone who has spent a career balancing numbers and finding what is missing. We spoke for 10 minutes that rearranged 10 years. Her story was simple, and that's what made it devastating. My father had opened accounts with sudden large deposits and quick withdrawals that matched dates in Vivian's notes about attempted solicitations. A loan signed under an alias he'd used in Nevada. A cashier's check that began with a meeting in a bank office and ended with a man named Barker in a parking lot. When I hung up, I had no appetite for anything except truth. I dressed for the meeting like Vivian would have dressed. Navy suit, hair tamed, shoes that made me an inch taller and 10 pounds harder to push. On my way out, I slipped the unopened envelope into my bag. Not a talisman exactly. A fuse. 2 o'clock was waiting for us when we arrived. My parents had brought a man in a shiny suit who introduced himself as Gerald Hoffman, their attorney. He shook hands with too much enthusiasm, like a man who wanted to prove he wasn't scared of dogs. Thompson didn't offer his hand. He offered seats and silence, both more useful. Before we begin, he said, I want to clarify my role. I served as Miss Hughes's attorney for 32 years. I am executor of her estate. And by provision she set in motion when Marilyn was 16, I serve as Marilyn's counsel today. He placed the thick file on the table and unfastened the tie with a sound like breath leaving a room. Let's resolve the confusion. I set my bag at my feet and felt the rectangular edge of the envelope through the leather. In my mind I could hear Vivian's voice. Never mistake guilt for guidance. Love is work performed steadily over time. The past had brought its spectacle. The next act would be skill. And for the first time since they walked back into my life, I felt something like calm. Because the truth was on my side. And so was she. The room felt smaller than it really was, the way spaces do when tension packs the air tighter than walls ever could. Thompson slid a bundle of documents across the polished wood. Each one a nail in the coffin my parents didn't yet know was being built for them. His voice remained calm, but I could sense the edge beneath it. The quiet steel Vivian had sharpened in him over decades of dealing with sharks disguised as family. He began with the basics. When Marilyn came into Ms. Hughes's care at age 13, the court initially granted temporary guardianship. Notices were issued to both of you for a permanent guardianship, hearing 6 months later. He tapped the first document. An official court order stamped with a seal so deep it left an imprint through the page. Neither of you appeared, though records show certified mail was delivered to your last known addresses. My mother frowned, shaking her head, her hands trembling slightly. We never received anything. We were moving so much it must have gotten lost. Indeed, Thompson said dryly. And yet someone did appear, claiming to represent you. A Mr. Lewis Barker, who filed an affidavit with both of your signatures granting full consent for Vivian Hughes to assume permanent guardianship. My father shifted in his seat. That's impossible. We never authorized anyone. Those signatures are forgeries. Thompson adjusted his glasses and pulled another file free. Miss Hughes anticipated that very claim. She hired a private investigator. Here are photographs documenting Mr. Winters gambling in Nevada during that period. Here is Mrs. Winters working as a cocktail waitress at the Silver Star Casino. And here, he set down a copy of a receipt with my father's unmistakable scrawl, is the record of a $15,000 payment from Mr. Barker to you the day after the affidavit was filed. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush the air from my lungs. My father's jaw tightened, and for a flicker of a second, I thought he might confess. But then he leaned forward, his voice smooth, the same voice he must have used in those casino back rooms. That was an unrelated business transaction. Unrelated, Thompson repeated, not even pretending to hide his disdain. Fascinating coincidence, then. I sat very still, hands folded in my lap, watching the way their masks cracked. For 15 years I'd imagined this moment, seeing their guilt exposed. But instead of satisfaction, I felt something closer to grief. These were my parents, the people who should have been my safety net. And here they were, tangled in lies like fishermen caught in their own nets. But Thompson wasn't finished. Furthermore, he continued, when Marilyn turned 16, Miss Hughes formally adopted her. The court records are clear. He lifted a page from the folder and passed it to me. My eyes locked on the words, Final Decree of Adoption. I'd been hers legally all along, though she'd never told me. I felt the sting of tears, but I forced myself to blink them back. I wasn't about to give my parents the satisfaction of seeing me unravel. That's not possible, my mother said, her voice rising now. She never told us. She didn't need to, Thompson cut in, his tone sharp enough to draw blood. You had already forfeited your rights. And she took the step you never did, making Marilyn her daughter in every legal, financial, and moral sense. My father's composure slipped. This is outrageous, he snapped. She stole our daughter. No, I said quietly, finally speaking. The steadiness of my own voice surprised me. You gave me away. You sold me for $15,000. Don't act like you've been robbed. You cashed the check. My father's face reddened, but my mother gasped, covering her mouth with trembling fingers. Marilyn, it wasn't like that. We were desperate. We didn't know what else to do. You could have stayed, I said. The words fell like stones, heavy and undeniable. You could have fought for me. You could have chosen me. But you didn't. Vivian did. For a moment, the room was silent except for the hum of the air vent. My parents sat across from me, stripped of the illusions they'd wrapped themselves in. And that was when Thompson pulled out one final envelope, sealed with my name and Vivian's handwriting across the front. Your aunt left this to be opened if your parents ever return to make claims, he said. Would you like to read it aloud or privately? I hesitated, the weight of the envelope in my hand heavier than any inheritance. Part of me wanted to tear it open and unleash whatever truths Vivian had buried inside. Part of me wanted to hide it away, to keep it just for me. But then I looked at my parents, at their pleading eyes and their practiced sorrow, and I knew, this letter wasn't just for me. It was for them too. I'll read it here, I said, sliding a finger under the seal. The sound of the paper tearing seemed to echo off the paneled walls. My aunt's handwriting was sharp and precise, just like her voice had always been. My dearest Marilyn, it began. If you are reading this, it means your parents have returned, not for you but for what they think you represent, money. Do not be fooled. They attempted to extort me on more than one occasion, even using you as leverage. I protected you then as I do now with evidence and foresight. Trust Mr. Thompson. Trust yourself. And remember, blood does not make family. Consistency does. I swallowed hard and kept reading, my voice steady even as my heart thundered. If they push for legal action, know that I adopted you to safeguard your future. And should they attempt to challenge my estate, my will includes a clause. Any contest will transfer everything, not to them, not even to you, but to a foundation for abandoned children. If they choose greed, they will lose everything. If they choose silence, you remain protected. Either way, you win. I have taught you to stand tall, Marilyn. Now prove to them that you can. When I finished, the silence was deafening. My mother's tears had turned into quiet sobs. My father sat stone-faced, his knuckles white against the armrest. And in that moment I felt something shift. For 15 years I had been the girl they left behind, the one waiting by the phone for a call that never came. But now I was the woman Vivian had raised, the daughter she had claimed, the heir she had trusted. And for the first time I realized the truth. They weren't here to reclaim me. They couldn't. I'd already been claimed. By someone far stronger. By someone who had never left. The silence after I finished reading Vivian's letter was so thick it seemed to soak into the oak-paneled walls. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a trembling handkerchief, whispering something about misunderstandings, while my father sat rigid, his jaw clenched so tight I could almost hear his molars grinding. Thompson folded his hands neatly on the desk, his expression unreadable. The terms are clear. Any attempt to challenge the adoption or the estate will result in forfeiture. Ms. Hughes was precise about her intentions. That should have been the end of it. But my father wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully. He leaned forward, his voice dropping into that half-threatening, half-reasonable tone I remembered from childhood arguments. You can't just erase us. We're her parents. That means something in the eyes of the law. No, Thompson said firmly, his tone clipped. You were her parents. You relinquished that role the moment you accepted payment to hand over your rights. Marilyn has been legally and irrevocably adopted for 12 years. You have no standing. My father's face flushed. He glanced at the slick-haired attorney they had brought, Hoffman, who had sat quietly until now, scribbling notes as though this were a chess match instead of a reckoning. Finally, Hoffman cleared his throat. With respect, Mr. Thompson, my clients have legitimate concerns about the handling of this estate. A sudden adoption, kept secret, combined with an extraordinary transfer of wealth, it raises questions. Thompson's eyes narrowed slightly, and for a moment I saw the sharp edge of the man Vivian had trusted with her empire. Questions are not claims, Mr. Hoffman, and the law does not reward those who abandon their responsibilities, only to resurface when there is profit to be had. I wanted to cheer, to throw my arms around Thompson, but instead, I sat very still, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. Because I knew my father, he would never leave quietly. And I was right. He turned to me, his voice softening into the syrupy tone that used to fool strangers. Marilyn, sweetheart, we're not here to take anything from you. We just want to be part of your life again. Don't shut the door on us forever. I felt a bitter laugh rising, but I forced it down. You already shut the door. 15 years ago. With a note. My mother flinched as though I'd slapped her. Tears streaked down her face, but her voice wobbled with desperation. We were sick, Marilyn. Your father had his addiction and I couldn't function. We thought Vivian would give you a better chance. You thought she'd do the work you didn't want to do, I corrected. The words hung in the air, sharper than any knife. My father's mask cracked then. His eyes hardened, the warmth draining away. That fortune came from our family, he said flatly. It should be shared. Don't forget, Vivian was my sister. Without our parents' money, she never would have built those stores. You wouldn't have a dime without us. The audacity made my blood boil. I wouldn't have a dime because you would have gambled it all away, I snapped. Vivian turned a small inheritance into an empire through decades of hard work. You had the same parents, the same start. What did you do with it? You walked away from me and chased poker chips. Don't pretend you're entitled to her success. He leaned back, folding his arms across his chest, but his eyes glinted with something dangerous. You think you're stronger than us now because she left you her fortune. But don't forget who you are. Blood is blood, Marilyn. That doesn't disappear. I straightened in my chair, meeting his glare head-on. Blood abandoned me. Vivian raised me. I know exactly who I am, and it's not yours anymore. Thompson cleared his throat. Unless there's anything further, I suggest we conclude. Ms. Hughes's wishes are legally binding. Marilyn's inheritance is secure. But I saw the way my parents looked at each other. A silent communication honed over years of scheming. They weren't done. Not by a long shot. When the meeting finally ended, Hoffman gathered his papers and muttered something about options. My parents rose slowly, their faces a mixture of anger and forced sorrow. My mother tried one last time, her voice breaking as she touched my sleeve. Please, sweetheart. Don't shut us out forever. We just want a chance. I pulled back, my voice cold. You had your chance. You had 15 years of chances. You chose gambling and excuses. Don't act like I'm the one closing the door. They left with Hoffman trailing behind, but as the door clicked shut, I knew this wasn't over. The look in my father's eyes was burned into my mind, the look of a man who had lost something he believed was his, and who wasn't above dirty tricks to try to take it back. As the room emptied, Thompson set a hand on my shoulder, steady and reassuring. Vivian prepared for this, he said quietly. She left me with every document, every record, every contingency. They can try, but they'll only dig themselves deeper. I nodded, trying to steady my breath. But when I left the office and drove back to the mansion, a gnawing unease followed me. And that night, just as I was preparing for bed, the doorbell rang. Through the stained glass window of the foyer, I saw them, my parents, standing on my doorstep. Again. The chime of the doorbell echoed through the mansion like a ghost rattling its chains. I froze halfway up the staircase, gripping the banister so tightly my knuckles whitened. Through the stained glass of the front door, I could make out the blurred shapes of two figures, familiar silhouettes I had spent years trying to forget. My parents. For a long, brittle moment I simply stood there. Every rational part of me screamed to ignore them, to let the police handle it. But another part, the part that had once waited night after night for them to return, pulled me forward. My feet carried me down the stairs, each step heavier than the last. I unlocked the door, but I didn't open it wide. You can't be here, I said through the narrow gap, my voice steady though my chest hammered. A restraining order is being filed. If you don't leave, I'll call the police. My father's face loomed in the glass, more haggard in the porch light than in the lawyer's office earlier. His jaw clenched. We're still your parents, Marilyn. You owe us the decency of a conversation without lawyers hiding behind paperwork. Owe you? I repeated, the word bitter on my tongue. I don't owe you anything. Before I could push the door closed, my mother shoved forward, slipping inside with a desperate kind of force. Her eyes darted around the grand foyer, drinking in the marble floors and sweeping staircase. We just want to talk, she insisted, her voice trembling. Please, sweetheart, don't be so cold. I planted myself between them and the rest of the house. 5 minutes, I said sharply. Then you leave. Or I call the police. My father stepped across the threshold, his shoulders squared like a man readying for battle. That woman poisoned you against us, he spat. Vivian always resented me. She used you to hurt me. She saved me. I shot back, my voice cracking with the force of it. She gave me a home, stability, an education. She gave me everything you didn't. My mother's tears spilled over, mascara streaking down her cheeks. We loved you, Marilyn. We were sick, but we loved you. Depression is an illness. Gambling is an addiction. We needed help, not judgment. I was 13. I cried, the dam inside me finally breaking. I needed parents, not excuses. Do you have any idea what it was like to wake up and find you gone? To wait by the phone, thinking maybe you'd call? To check the mailbox every single day, hoping for one card, one word, anything. They didn't answer. My father's eyes flickered away, my mother sobbed harder, but neither of them spoke. And for the first time in years, I let the words that had been festering in me pour out like poison. You left me like I was nothing. Vivian may have been strict, but she never abandoned me. She never broke a promise. She showed up every single day. That's love. Not words. Not excuses. Actions. We're here now. my father said, softening his tone, slipping into that salesman charm I recognized from my childhood. We can rebuild. Start over. We can be a family again. You're here now because Vivian left me money, I said flatly. If she died poor, would you have shown up at all? The silence that followed was answer enough. I clenched my fists, my anger boiling into something sharper clarity. Thompson showed me the reports. You knew where I was for 15 years. You chose not to contact me until now. Don't pretend this is about love. My mother's sobs turned to wails, but my father's expression hardened, the mask of sincerity slipping. You have no idea what we've been through, he growled. While you lived in luxury, we lived in poverty. That wealth should have been shared. You're nothing without us. Biology doesn't just disappear. I met his glare without flinching. Biology doesn't make family. Showing up does. And you didn't. The sound of tires crunching on gravel outside made me glance past them. Blue and red lights flashed against the stained glass. The patrol car Vivian had arranged months ago. A precaution I hadn't understood until now. Pulled into the driveway. That will be the police, I said, my voice calm even as my heart pounded. Leave now, or they'll escort you out. My father's face twisted with rage. He grabbed my arm, his grip bruising. You think you've won, he hissed. But we can make your life hell. We can tell stories about Vivian. Ruin her precious reputation. Do you really want her legacy dragged through the mud? I jerked free, pointing to the corner of the foyer where a small black lens blinked. Every threat you make is being recorded. Vivian installed cameras years ago. Do you really want to add extortion to your list of mistakes? His face paled, and for once he seemed at a loss for words. He turned to my mother, muttered, "She's not worth the trouble," and started toward the door. But before leaving, my mother turned back, her face streaked with tears. You'll regret this when you're alone, Marilyn. Money can't hug you at night. Family is everything. I held her gaze, my voice quiet but unyielding. Vivian was my family. You were just DNA. The police officer knocked firmly on the doorframe, asking if everything was all right. I nodded, stepping aside to let him escort them out. As their figures disappeared into the night, the house fell silent again. For years, I'd fantasized about this moment. Their return, the explanations, maybe even an apology that would make sense of it all. But the reality was clearer than I ever expected. They hadn't come back for me. They'd come for what I had. And standing in that vast, echoing foyer, I finally realized I didn't need them. I never had. I didn't sleep that night. Even after the patrol car's taillights disappeared down the driveway, my body thrummed with adrenaline, every shadow in the mansion feeling heavier than usual. I sat in the study, Vivian's study, my study now, surrounded by shelves of law books, business binders, and her meticulous files. The glow of the desk lamp cast the papers in warm light, but I felt cold to the bone. I pulled the Winters file back onto the desk, the one I had discovered days earlier. My aunt had kept records like a general preparing for war, and in the quiet hours after my parents' ambush at the house, I needed the truth more than I needed sleep. The file was thicker than I remembered. Beneath the adoption decree and investigators' reports were tabs marked with years, 2008, 2010, 2013, all the way through to just before Vivian's death. My heart thudded as I flipped through. In 2008, 3 years after I came to live with her, my father had demanded $50,000. The investigators' notes detailed the threat. He would fight for custody if Vivian didn't pay. My aunt, fearing a legal battle would re-traumatize me, paid. In cash. In 2010, another attempt, $25,000 this time, citing medical emergencies. The investigator confirmed there were no hospital visits, no diagnoses. Just another gamble that Vivian refused to indulge. She hired private security for the house instead. And in 2013, when I was preparing for college, an email surfaced, sent to an address they'd somehow obtained, asking for tuition money to rebuild their relationship with me. Vivian had intercepted it, blocked the sender, and noted in her file, "Do not let Marilyn see this. She deserves peace, not manipulation." Tears stung my eyes. For so long, I'd thought my parents had simply disappeared, erasing me from their lives without a second thought. But now I saw it clearly. They hadn't forgotten me at all. They'd remembered me as leverage. A bargaining chip. A payday. I pressed the heels of my hands to my eyes, anger and sorrow burning together in my chest. Vivian had carried this burden alone, shielding me from every ugly attempt, every cruel scheme. She hadn't wanted me to know the truth, but now that I did, I felt something shift inside me. The pain was real, yes, but so was the strength, because the truth laid bare in black and white set me free. The next morning, I met Thompson at his office. He looked weary but unsurprised when I handed him the thick file. "I knew she kept her own records," he murmured. "Vivian never trusted anyone to fight her battles for her. They tried to extort her for years," I said, my voice hoarse from lack of sleep. "She paid once, but after that, she documented everything. Every lie, every attempt." Thompson nodded. "Which means if they attempt anything further, we have them cornered." He tapped the file gently. "You're holding a fortress of evidence, Marilyn. This is more than enough to stop them cold in court, or in public opinion." And public opinion was exactly where my parents struck next. That afternoon, I received a call from a journalist at the Herald-Gazette. My parents had given an exclusive interview claiming Vivian Hughes had stolen me from them, manipulated the courts, and brainwashed me against my real family. They painted themselves as victims of a cold, calculating woman who had hoarded wealth that should have been shared among the siblings. I nearly dropped the phone, bile rising in my throat. "Did they give you proof?" I asked tightly. The journalist hesitated. "They showed us some papers, but nothing official. Frankly, it looks like hearsay. But they're making serious accusations. We're giving you the chance to comment before we publish." I thanked him, hung up, and drove straight to Thompson's office again. He was already on the phone, his voice clipped. "Yes, I'm aware. No, they have no standing. If you print defamatory claims, we'll pursue legal action." He hung up and rubbed his temples. "They're desperate, Marilyn. They know they can't win legally, so they're trying to poison the well." "I won't let them tarnish her name," I said fiercely. "Not after everything she did to protect me." And so we went on the offensive. Thompson provided the paper with the adoption decree, the investigators' reports, and Vivian's sealed letter, the one I had read aloud in front of them. We didn't just refute the lies. We obliterated them. By the time the article ran 2 days later, the headline read, "Business Icon's Legacy Protected. Attempts to Challenge Estate Proven Fraudulent." My parents weren't painted as victims. They were exposed as manipulators who had tried to exploit their daughter and her guardian for money. When I saw their names in print beside words like extortion and gambling debts, I felt a strange mixture of sorrow and relief. Sorrow for the people they could have been. Relief that the world finally saw them for what they truly were. That night, I returned to the mansion and sat in the garden where Vivian and I had once shared quiet Sunday mornings. The stars hung above me, steady and unchanging. And for the first time since her death, I didn't feel completely alone. She had prepared me for this battle. She had given me the tools, the evidence, the strength. And though my parents had tried to twist my story into theirs, the truth had cut through. But deep down I knew they weren't finished. People like my father didn't quit when money was on the table. They regrouped, reloaded, and came back swinging. And when they did, I would be ready. The morning after the article dropped, I woke to a house that felt strangely lighter, as though the truth printed in ink had driven out some of the ghosts clinging to its walls. For years I'd carried the silent shame of being abandoned, the questions that haunted me whenever I saw families laughing in grocery store aisles or exchanging Christmas cards at the post office. And now, for the first time, the shame wasn't mine anymore. It was theirs. But the relief didn't last long. Around noon, Thompson called. His voice was clipped, urgent. "They're escalating, Marilyn. Your parents' attorney filed a motion this morning. An attempt to freeze parts of the estate until a hearing can be scheduled. It won't hold. Not with the adoption papers and Vivian's clause in the will. But their strategy is clear. Delay, harass, drain your patience." I gripped the phone tighter. "They're trying to bleed me dry." "Exactly," he said. "It won't succeed legally, but it may wear you down emotionally. That's why we need to rely on Vivian's final safeguard." I frowned. "What safeguard?" Thompson hesitated, and I could almost hear him weighing how much to reveal. Vivian anticipated this exact tactic. She left something. A contingency she called her nuclear option. It's sealed in my office safe. She asked me not to show you unless absolutely necessary. I think now qualifies. The words lodged in my chest. Vivian always 3 steps ahead, even from the grave. What is it? I asked. You should see for yourself, he replied. Come this afternoon. By the time I arrived at his office, the familiar paneled walls and leather scent felt less like a lawyer's office and more like a war room. Thompson produced a thick manila envelope marked with my name in Vivian's hand. Across the seal she had written, "For Marilyn when blood turns to poison." My throat tightened as I broke it open. Inside was a dossier unlike anything I'd seen before. Pages of transcripts, copies of checks, and, most damning of all, recordings. Thompson played one. My father's voice crackled through the small speaker, angry and desperate. "You'll pay us, Vivian. Or we'll drag this through court until your precious niece is broken. 50,000, that's nothing compared to what you've got." Then Vivian's cool, measured reply. "You'll regret this, Edward. I document everything." The recording ended, but the silence it left was louder than any threat. Thompson looked at me gravely. "This isn't just evidence. It's a weapon. If your parents continue their campaign, we'll release this to the court and the press. It will ruin them completely." I stared at the file torn. Part of me wanted to torch them with it immediately, to expose every rotten piece of their schemes. But another part, smaller, softer, still ached with the memory of Friday movie nights and cinnamon rolls at Christmas. Could I really destroy them so thoroughly? Before I could answer, the decision was nearly made for me. That evening, as I returned to the mansion, I found the security lights blazing. The front gate hung open, its lock cut clean through. My pulse spiked as I pulled into the driveway and saw the front door ajar. Inside, chaos. Drawers overturned, papers scattered, the faint smell of cigarette smoke lingering in the air. My stomach dropped. I knew that smell. My father's habit. They had been here. I rushed to the study. The desk drawers were open, but thankfully Vivian's files were locked in the fireproof cabinet Thompson had helped me secure after the last meeting. They hadn't gotten what they wanted, but the violation was enough. I dialed the police, my voice shaking. The officers took their report, dusted for fingerprints, and promised to patrol the area more frequently. But I could see the look in their eyes, the quiet pity of men who knew this wouldn't be the last time. Later that night, sitting in the wreckage of my once pristine home, I opened Vivian's letter again, reading her words underlined in bold strokes. Blood does not make family. Consistency does. And I knew what had to be done. If they wanted war, I would give them war. Not with fists, not with threats, but with truth. The next day, Thompson filed a counter-motion using Vivian's recordings. Alongside it, he submitted sworn affidavits from Mrs. Bentley and the private investigators who had witnessed my parents' past extortion attempts. The judge's response was swift and brutal. Not only was their motion denied, but the court scheduled a hearing to determine if their actions constituted criminal harassment. Suddenly, it wasn't me under scrutiny. It was them. But even cornered animals lash out. And my father was nothing if not a cornered animal. 3 nights later, I woke to the sound of shattering glass. The sound was wrong for the house, too jagged, too sudden. A Victorian like this breathes and settles, its noises old and dignified. This was violence. A hard pop, then the tinkling rain of safety glass giving up its shape. I was upright before memory caught up, heart hammering against my ribs like it wanted to escape. For a breath I thought of earthquakes or thunder, anything that belonged to nature. Then the alarm blared and eroded that hope. I grabbed my phone and slid off the bed, bare feet finding the rug runner I'd refused to remove even when we modernized the room. The cameras pinged my home app. Motion detected in the sunroom. A second notification. Kitchen. I tapped the live feed and saw nothing but the weird greenish palette of night vision, until a shoulder cut across the frame. A man in a dark hoodie ducked under the camera's cone with the practiced motion of someone who understood surveillance. Called 911. Years ago, saying those numbers would have felt like betrayal, snitching, inviting strangers into the mess. Now it felt like choosing the adult I had become over the child who still, sometimes, wanted to keep everyone's secrets. 911. What's your emergency? Break in, I whispered, moving fast and low down the back staircase. I'm at 347 Lakeview Drive. Intruder in the house. Alarm is active. I'm in the library, door locked. Stay on the line. Units are en route. Are you alone in the residence? Yes. Do you have a safe place? A room you can secure? I slid into the small anteroom off the library where Vivian used to keep gift wrap and ribbon, her only concession to whimsy. I closed the solid core door and turned the bolt. I'm locked in. Stay quiet, ma'am. Officers are 3 minutes out. 3 minutes is nothing and forever. I crouched by the low built-in and pressed my palm against the cool wood, feeling the thud of my own pulse in my fingertips. Then footsteps 1 floor down. Not stealthy now, confident. A man who believed the house belonged to him in the way night belongs to whoever enters it. The footsteps ascended the main staircase. Boards my ear knew by memory creaked as if reporting. The intruder crossed the landing, and the alarm cut off as if a thumb had found the keypad. Someone knew the layout. Someone had wanted no more attention than necessary. The doorknob to the library turned. Stopped. Turned again, harder. A muttered curse made the hair at the back of my neck lift. I knew that voice. When you've lived with a person's rages, your body records the shape they make in air. Marilyn, he called softly. The salesman's velvet, threaded with wire. Come on out. I didn't answer. The knob tried once more. Then a palm hit the door with a flat thud. The sound of a man reining himself in because he'd calculated the cost of breaking this barrier and decided to save it for later. Police are on the way, I said, pitching my voice low and level. Get out while you can. He laughed, a quiet bark. You called them to your own house? With all that documentation lying around. He let the implication hang. Open the door, sweetheart. Let your old man talk to you. A blue-white strobe washed the walls. Tires crunched on the drive. The front door, already broken from the sunroom breach, banged as it hit the jamb. Police! A voice shouted. Footsteps, radios. Orders. The house filled with other men's certainty. The knob went still. Another curse, softer. Then steps retreating. Across the landing, down the hallway to the east staircase that servants had once used. He'd done his homework. He knew the paths. I waited for the dispatcher's calm voice to be replaced by a real one in my hallway before I slid back the bolt. 2 officers stood framed in the library door, reflective bands bright. One spoke while the other scanned. Ma'am, are you hurt? No. Stay with Officer Daniels. We're clearing the house. I nodded and forced myself to breathe evenly, to keep my voice from shaking as I described what I'd heard. The rooms he'd passed through, the sunroom glass. The name I didn't say because that was for statements, not this moment. When they finished their sweep, the sergeant returned with a small evidence bag. Inside it, a cheap disposable lighter, black with a silver wheel. We found this by the kitchen door, he said. And shoe prints across the flagstone. We'll dust for prints and pull the camera footage. Do you think he's still nearby? Not with 6 units outside and the K9 on the way. The officer offered a professional half-smile. Whoever it was didn't want a confrontation. The alarm gave him a timeline and he ran out of it. I stared at the bag. The lighter was nothing and everything. My father used to turn such lighters in his fingers the way other men worked rosary beads. He'd click and spin and click. A fidget that left little moons of melted plastic around the wheel. The officers took my statement at the kitchen island under the brutal honesty of recessed lights. And while I answered, something clicked in me the way good locks do. A decision sliding into place. I was done reacting. I was done letting other people pick the terrain. My home was not a stage for their threats. My grief was not a prop. When the last cruiser rolled away, the house felt cavernous but no longer companionless. Vivian's presence had never been sentimental. No perfume caught on drapes, no sweaters drooped over chairs, but I felt her steadiness as if it hummed in the joists. Steadily, she'd underlined. The word had never felt more like a command. I called Thompson. He answered on the second ring. I could hear paper and the click of a lamp. Are you safe? Yes. Police came. He got in and ran when they arrived. They found a lighter. I'm pretty sure it's his. A pause. Then we execute the plan. The nuclear option. Yes. The calmness with which he said it steadied me, even as the phrase put iron in my mouth. We'll ruin them, I said. It wasn't a question. It was a ledger line. Marilyn, he said gently, they chose the ruin when they chose the method. You're just letting the truth reach daylight. We met at his office at 9 a.m., the city not yet fully awake, the corridor outside his suite smelling faintly of coffee and toner. He had already compiled a packet. The recordings, the PI reports, sworn statements from Mrs. Bentley and 2 store managers who remembered my father calling them about family equity. He'd added screenshots from the home alarm system, and stills from the camera that showed a figure in a hoodie moving through the sunroom. No face but enough to show intent, method, the cut lock, a pattern of escalation. We'll file for a temporary protective order with an expansion to include the residence and place of work, he said, tapping the first motion. We'll attach the recordings under seal and request the court to unseal if opposing counsel continues to misrepresent. We'll also refer the break-in to the district attorney with our package. If your father is as careless as he has been, this will make an impression. And the press. I've arranged an interview with the Herald-Gazette's legal affairs editor. On the record, but strictly factual. You will not need to speak. The documents will. I breathed out slowly. Let's do it. The filings went live by noon. The editor called by 2. We've reviewed the materials, he said, voice intent but careful. This is significant. We can corroborate dates through court dockets and police logs. We'd like to run a piece framing this as a case study in protective estate planning. Names included. Recordings excerpted with your permission. Use what you need, I said. Just tell the truth. By 4, the judge granted the extended order. The language was precise and devastating. Credible evidence of harassment and potential extortion. Substantial documentation of prior solicitations. Substantial risk of continued harm if contact not restrained. Reading those sentences, I felt a kind of vindication that wasn't joy so much as rightness. Like seeing a picture straighten on a wall that had hung crooked your entire life. At dusk, while one of the glaziers boarded the sunroom pane and measured for replacement, Mrs. Bentley arrived with a thermos and a look that could frighten wolves. I'll not have them thinking this house is empty, she said, bustling into the kitchen with proprietary efficiency. I've changed more locks in this place than some prisons. We'll change them again. She poured me tea as I half laughed, half cried. He left you scared, she said softly. Now you leave him seen. The article hit the paper's site just after 8. The headline was cool. The way fires are when contained by professionals. Estate heiress files protective order. Evidence reveals years of coercion attempts. There were quotes from Thompson, measured and impenetrable, a statement from the DIS office confirming receipt of materials, and a short clip embedded with audio scrubbing that allowed the reader to hear a man, clearly my father, demand money and threaten dragging this through court. The paper had redacted my surname in the audio. It wasn't necessary to hear who he was to understand what he was. An hour later, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't know. I let it go to voicemail. The transcription populated in gray bubbles. Marilyn, it's Mom. Please, this has gotten out of hand. Your father is beside himself. We didn't mean for it to go this far. Can we talk? Just you and me. No lawyers. I watched the little dots of text settle. Behind them, the shape of the same old play. Move the conversation away from sunlight and witnesses, back into the living room where everything can be renegotiated with tears. I didn't call back. I forwarded the message to Thompson, who replied with a single line. Record, archive, ignore. It was almost funny how training could become language between people who had weathered too many storms together. The next morning, the police called me in to view a photo lineup. The shoe prints from the flagstone had yielded a brand and size. The lighter had prints that matched an old arrest for disorderly conduct in Nevada, and a neighbor's doorbell camera had caught the hooded figure jogging, huffing, down the street at 2:43 a.m. The gait was unmistakable to me. Bodies learn their first geography from watching the people who raise them move around kitchens and down hallways. My chest felt tight as I pointed. That one. The detective nodded, not triumphantly but with the relief of a puzzle piece finally sliding home. Charges followed 2 days later. Trespass, attempted burglary, violation of a court order once the new injunction was served retroactively to the hour it had been filed. I imagined the knock on my parents' Phoenix condo door. The way my father would bluster and my mother would cry. The way some long-suffering officer would explain that paper has weight when it bears the court seal. should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like an end to one kind of story and the beginning of another. My therapist, Dr. Freeman, who had sat through so many versions of 13-year-old me, said a thing that stayed with me when I told her. Accountability doesn't erase grief, it simply allows it to have the right owner. That night, I took the nuclear option dossier from its folder and set it on the kitchen table. I didn't open it. I needed to know it was there the way ships need to know the lighthouse is lit even if they're not sailing tonight. I made dinner, real food, not the emergency toast that had seen me through too many stressful days, and ate it at the formal end of the mahogany table where Vivian used to host buyers and bankers. After, I walked the perimeter of the house with a flashlight, the beam a thin white ribbon that said this ground is claimed. In the garden, the night-blooming jasmine released a sweetness that didn't feel like a lie. I looked up and spoke to the sky the way children speak under blankets. I did what you do, I said. The magnolia didn't answer, but the quiet that followed felt like agreement. The following week brought the hearing. My parents did not appear. Their attorney did, looking wilted, like a bouquet left too long out of water. The judge read the affidavit where my mother had claimed guardianship rights, and then the adoption decree that vaporized that claim like sunlight on fog. He read the transcript of the recording, then played 20 seconds of audio that filled the courtroom with the peculiar intimacy of other people's worst choices. When it ended, the judge removed his glasses and polished them with a square of cloth. "There's a line," he said, not unkindly, "and your clients crossed it." He extended the protective order for a year, with automatic renewal upon petition, and referred the burglary matter to criminal court. I didn't cry. Not in the courtroom, not in the hallway where Thompson squeezed my shoulder, not in the parking garage where the air smelled like rubber and rain. I cried that night, alone in the study, not for them but for the 13-year-old who had believed a note could not be the whole story because no decent story ends with a scrap of paper and an empty closet. When the tears burned out, I opened a drawer I had ignored for months, the one in the center of Vivian's desk, locked with a key only she and now I had. The wooden box inside was small and unremarkable. It held report cards I hadn't known she kept, my first business card from the corporate office, the program from my graduation with my name underlined once in her fine hand. Beneath those, an envelope on personal stationery, different from the legal letter we'd already used to hold the line. The salutation made something in my chest ache in a good way. My daughter. Not my name. My place. There will come a day, she had written, when you realize that money is loud but integrity is durable. Choose the latter. It is the only thing that keeps shape under pressure. If you must break a heart, let it be your own illusions. Keep the documents. Keep your wits. Keep the house. I built it as a machine for steadiness. You don't owe anyone a performance of softness. You owe the girl you were the decency of survival without apology. I read it twice. Then I put it back, not because I was done with it, but because it deserved to be where it was when I needed it again. The next morning, I woke up and found that I could think past the crisis. The mansion's corridors felt less like a gauntlet and more like hallways in a place that had my name on the deed. I walked to the back window and looked over the garden and, for the first time since the will reading, planned something beyond defense. My father had said something cruel that was also true. Wealth is loud. So I would use it to amplify what mattered, not his noise. Vivian had left more than money. She'd left an engine. I would turn it toward people who were 13 and alone in apartments where the fridge hummed as if it were the only adult left. But before I could build, there was one more thing to finish. Loose threads catch on everything. The criminal case would proceed. The order would hold. The public record now matched the private one. There was, however, a letter from my mother on my hall table. Delivered by post, handwritten, pen pressing hard on the paper so the words left ridges. She had written that she was sorry, that she had loved me in the small broken ways she knew how, that she didn't know how to fix anything but wanted me to know she wasn't the worst parts of him. I didn't know if any of that was true. I did know that answering it was not required to move forward. So I put it in a drawer. Not the trash. Not the keepsake box. A drawer is where you keep things you might need to touch again so your hands remember why you stopped picking them up. The night before the arraignment, I stood on the front steps and looked over the gravel where the lighter had fallen. The glazier had replaced the sunroom pane. The lock on the gate clicked shut with a satisfying finality. In the quiet, the house didn't feel haunted. It felt occupied. Tomorrow, I would watch a judge say my father's full name out loud in a room where names have consequences. The day after, I would meet with the board to sign the papers creating the foundation Vivian had sketched in her notes, the one for kids who needed steadiness more than they needed speeches. In a week, I would take fresh flowers to a grave whose headstone now carried a single additional word that told the whole story. But first sleep. The good kind without glass. I turned and went inside, switching off lights as I went. The house settled around me, not like a weight but like a well-made coat. There was still a Part 10 to write, just not on paper yet. It would begin in the courthouse lobby, where marble echoes turn heels into metronomes and where a daughter can look at a man and see, finally, not a myth, not a wound but a defendant. And I would be exactly what Vivian trained me to be, steady. The morning sun bled across the horizon, painting the city in shades of orange and gold. Cassandra stood in front of the courthouse steps, her tailored black dress and calm, commanding presence turning heads. To the world, she looked like a woman on a mission. To her family, who were already gathered inside, she looked like a storm about to strike. She had spent weeks preparing this moment, the moment she would finally unmask every lie, every betrayal, and every cruelty that had been weaponized against her. The courtroom wasn't just a place of law today. It was the stage where her family's twisted web of greed would unravel before the world. Inside, Vanessa smirked as Cassandra walked past her. "Still pretending you're better than us?" she whispered. But Cassandra only met her sister's eyes with a calm smile. "Not pretending," she replied. "Proving." The judge called the room to order. Cassandra's lawyer, Mr. Daniels, placed a thick binder of evidence onto the desk with a satisfying thud. "Your Honor," he began. "Today we present not only proof of financial fraud committed by members of the Wilson family, but also evidence of a targeted campaign to strip Cassandra Wilson of her rightful assets after her lottery win." Gasps rippled through the court as names, accounts, and forged documents were displayed on the projector. Her parents shifted uncomfortably, Vanessa's smirk faltered, and Eric, her ex-husband, looked pale, as if the ground had vanished beneath him. Cassandra rose to her feet. Her voice was steady, deliberate. "I gave each of you chances. I asked for love, for honesty, for respect. You gave me betrayal, deceit, and cruelty. You thought I was powerless, but you underestimated the strength of someone who has nothing left to lose but everything to fight for." Every word landed like a hammer. The audience watched in stunned silence. The evidence was irrefutable. The judge's gavel struck, declaring judgment in Cassandra's favor. Her family's empire, built on manipulation and stolen wealth, collapsed in one ruling. Assets were seized, bank accounts frozen, and their reputations shattered. As Cassandra walked out of the courtroom, the press swarmed her. Flashes lit up the air, microphones thrust toward her. "Ms. Wilson, do you have a statement?" She paused at the top of the courthouse stairs, the sun illuminating her like a beacon. "Yes," she said clearly. "To anyone who's ever been underestimated, betrayed, or silenced. Know this. Your silence is not weakness. Your pain is not permanent. And sometimes the greatest revenge is simply standing tall when they expect you to crawl." The crowd erupted in applause. Cassandra stepped down the stairs, her chin lifted high. She was no longer the woman begging her family for scraps of kindness. She was the woman who had claimed her power and her peace. And as she disappeared into the waiting car, Cassandra knew one thing for certain. This was not the end of her story. It was only the beginning. In the end, Cassandra's story teaches us that betrayal can break you only if you allow it. True power is not found in revenge alone but in reclaiming your dignity, your voice, and your future. As she stood tall against those who doubted her, she reminded us all, your silence is not weakness. Your pain is not permanent. And sometimes the greatest revenge is simply standing tall when they expect you to crawl. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe for more powerful tales like this. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever been underestimated but proved everyone wrong? And don't forget to share this video with someone who needs to hear it today.